Upon hearing that my close friend, Dean, had been suddenly hospitalized, I rushed to the hospital to check on her. In the hospital room, Dean appeared utterly gaunt. She refused to speak to anyone, simply burying her face in the blankets and sobbing uncontrollably. Lucas, Dean's husband, walked me downstairs and began to open up about the bizarre events that had plagued their family. It all began with a house they had recently purchased. Although it was an old property, the previous owner had barely lived there, leaving the furniture in pristine condition. When he first found the listing online, Lucas was struck by the unexpectedly low price compared to its actual market value. Upon making contact, he learned the owner needed an urgent sale to move abroad and was even willing to leave all the furniture behind. The transaction proceeded quickly and smoothly, with both parties soon finalizing the contract exactly as planned. However, Dean felt something was amiss. She didn't believe in such windfalls from the sky and expressed her lingering concerns to her husband. Lucas reassured his wife that the project was built by a reputable developer with an excellent standing, so there couldn't be any issues. Lowering his voice, he asserted that he had done thorough research. No one had ever died in the house, and the previous owner's background was completely clean. Hearing her husband's detailed explanation, the anxiety in Dean's heart eased somewhat. Within just 1 week, all the title transfer and tax procedures were completed without a hitch. On the day they moved into their new nest, the couple couldn't hide their joy at finally escaping the endless cycle of renting. As they stepped into the master bedroom, their eyes were immediately drawn to the massive bed standing prominently in the center of the room. The bed wasn't flashy, but it possessed a classic antique charm with intricate carvings and great elegance. They began organizing their belongings in the closet and together spread a brand new set of linens over the old bed. Both worked tirelessly to clean every nook and cranny. The house, already fresh, now felt more beautiful and cozy than ever. It wasn't until 8 o'clock in the evening that the cleaning was truly finished to their mutual satisfaction. After a simple dinner, Lucas lay on the bed relaxing with his phone, while Dean sat at the vanity performing her skincare routine before sleep. While opening a jar of moisturizer, she accidentally let the lid slip from her hand, and it fell to the floor. The round lid rolled across the ground and vanished into the dark void beneath the bed. Dean frowned slightly. She bent down and reached into the darkness under the bed to retrieve the small item. Suddenly, her hand brushed against something cold and strangely slimy. A chill ran down her spine as she realized with horror that the object she had just touched was a human hand. Terrified, Dean let out a piercing scream. She quickly recoiled and tumbled backward. Hearing the commotion, Lucas sat up abruptly to check on her, half joking if there was a mouse hiding under there. Her whole body trembling, Dean pointed toward the space under the bed, stammering to her husband that there was a hand underneath. Lucas laughed at his wife's fear, asserting that he had just cleaned that area earlier that afternoon, so it was impossible. However, wanting to put his wife's mind at ease, he grabbed the flashlight and approached to investigate the truth for himself. The flashlight illuminated every corner. The space under the bed was completely empty, with only the jar lid lying silently on the clean floor. Lucas picked up the lid, handed it to his wife, and smiled, teasing her about her overactive imagination. Seeing his wife still in a daze, He gently comforted her, suggesting that work pressure might be causing hallucinations, and advised her to go to bed early. Dean stared at her hand. Despite trying to reassure herself, the cold, visceral sensation from earlier still haunted her mind. 3 days later, when Lucas had to work overtime and returned home late, Dean had to go to sleep alone in the quiet room. In the dead of night, while she was fast asleep, she suddenly felt a strange pushing force from beneath the mattress. The once flat mattress became unusually lumpy right under her back, making it impossible for her to rest peacefully. That force was so strong that it felt as though it was lifting her entire body off the bed in the pitch black night. A raspy, ominous voice whispered close to her ear, ordering her to leave the bed immediately. Dean snapped awake. In utter panic, she used all her strength to sit up, threw off the blanket, and bolted from the bed. She rushed to the door, standing frozen and looking back at the bed, her face completely drained of color. Under the dim light, she saw with horror the distinct silhouette of someone lying beneath the blanket. Memories of the cold hand from a few days ago flooded back. She realized her fear was real. Someone was indeed in the room. Not daring to hesitate any longer, she ran to the living room, trembling as she called Lucas, sobbing and begging him to come home immediately. Fortunately, Lucas had just finished work and reached the apartment gate. He quickly reassured his wife over the phone. As soon as she saw her husband step into the house, Dean lunged at him and embraced him, crying and insisting that none of it was a hallucination. Lucas still didn't understand what was happening. He could only hold his wife, gently stroking her, shaking back to help her calm down. He went into the bedroom once more to check thoroughly under the bed, but still found nothing unusual. On the bed, the linens were disheveled exactly as they were when Dean had fled in panic. But there was absolutely no sign of a third person. Seeing that his wife was severely traumatized, Lucas decided to let her sleep temporarily in the living room to escape the terror of the bedroom. He even went so far as to invite a shaman to perform a ritual and paste a sealing talisman directly onto the master bedroom door. From then on, the strange occurrences indeed stopped. But Dean's excitement for the new house had completely vanished. Time passed quietly. One weekend, Lucas was still engrossed in his work for foreign clients on his computer. Dean, naturally meticulous about cleanliness, began deep cleaning the living room and surrounding areas. While working in the hallway, a pungent smell of rusty iron suddenly hit her, forcing her to stop. Following that unpleasant scent, her footsteps stopped right in front of the bedroom door that had been sealed for so long. She told herself that perhaps the humid weather had caused metal objects inside to rust, a normal occurrence for a room kept closed for too long. Gathering her courage, Dean pushed the door open and stepped in, believing that in broad daylight, nothing dangerous could possibly happen. The room was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the weak light filtering through the gaps in the curtains created a bone-chillingly gloomy atmosphere. Although she felt uneasy, she began mopping the floor, wanting to finish the task quickly and leave. The floor and furniture had been wiped down, but the pungent smell of rusty iron did not fade. It grew even more suffocating. Her eyes rested on the only area that hadn't been touched, the dark void under the bed. Not having enough courage to crawl under, she stood at a distance, thrusting the mop under the bed and sweeping it around perfunctorily. As she prepared to pull the mop out, she felt a powerful force gripping the handle, and a hideous hand gradually emerged. That hand was riddled with sores and decay, and it was the source of the horrific rusty smell permeating the room. Dean collapsed to the ground, her breathing becoming rapid. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt constricted, unable to make a sound. From her position on the floor, she saw clearly a pale, ghostly face staring intently at her from under the bed. That horrific entity began to crawl out, its facial features becoming clearer and more terrifying. As it crawled, it emitted raspy growls, repeating the threatening warning that she was not allowed to sleep on that bed. In the final moments before losing consciousness, Dean used her last bit of strength to cry out Lucas's name for help. That cry for help marked the moment her strength was completely exhausted. Darkness enveloped her vision as she fainted on the floor. After taking his wife to the hospital, Lucas was heartbroken to see her fall into a state of severe panic. She would cry bitterly whenever she saw a stranger. He never stopped blaming himself for being too dismissive and not taking his wife's early warning seriously. Witnessing Dean's pitiful situation, I could only remain silent and hope for her speedy recovery. For now, peace and quiet were her best medicine. Later, Lucas moved his wife out of that haunted house to live in Dean's hometown, where her spirit gradually began to stabilize. Lucas was certain the bed was the source of all the misfortune, so he spent a large sum of money to have a shaman thoroughly dispose of the item. Rumor has it that the entity dwelling under that bed was extremely malevolent, perhaps a soul carrying a resentment that reached the heavens before death. As for the house, Lucas listed it for sale online. With today's active market, it will likely soon belong to a new owner who remains unaware of the chilling past within. This strange story took place in a remote riverside countryside where most of the inhabitants lived by fishing. In that region, there was a vast lotus pond, a place where old Zhao, a fisherman who had spent his entire life on the water, frequently went to make a living. It was a day in August, 1934. Old Zhao was rowing his small wooden boat to cast his nets as usual, but he had no idea that this day would be one he could never forget. For half the day, he cast dozens of nets but caught absolutely nothing. This left him deeply perplexed because no one knew these lotus waters better than he did. Normally, just a few casts would fill his basket with fish. However, today, the fish seemed to be fleeing from him. Feeling inevitably disappointed, old Zhao sighed softly and intended to pull in his nets to head home. At the very moment he was about to turn the boat around, a massive dark shadow suddenly glided across the water's surface from the side of the boat. That sudden appearance made old Zhao jump in terror. Although he could not see the shape clearly beneath the dark water, he could sense that the shadow was enormous. The dark shadow swam at extreme speed past the bottom of the boat and then darted straight into a dense patch of lotus. Old Zhao hurriedly leaned forward, trying to see clearly what it was. The mysterious creature moved through the water with an astonishing speed. Before he could get a clear look, the dark shadow completely vanished into the thick lotus. Having spent his whole life tied to this pond, old Zhao was confident he understood everything beneath its surface. But what he had just seen was completely beyond his understanding. His mind was in a daze, and he could only stare blankly toward the lotus patch. Its shape was not like a fish, but rather looked like a giant python. However, in this pond, Even water snakes rarely appeared. How could there be such a massive python? After a moment of being stunned by shock, Old Zhao began to feel afraid. He hurriedly used all his strength to row the boat as fast as possible toward the shore. Yet, as he was rowing with all his might, a colossal force from beneath the water suddenly flipped the wooden boat right off the surface of the lake. The impact was so violent that it scared Old Zhao out of his wits. He completely lost his balance and tumbled into the cold water before he could react. As someone who had spent his life struggling with the river, he quickly held his breath to stabilize his body. Although visibility underwater was very limited, he remained extremely vigilant, fearing the creature would attack again. While he was focusing on observing his surroundings, a powerful surge of water rushed toward him, and a large dark shadow glided right past his back. Terrified, Old Zhao turned his head to look, but the creature moved too fast. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the deep, dark depths. Before he could regain his composure, the thing darted past his face once more. This time, although he couldn't see it in its entirety, he managed to catch a glimpse of its body. Its body was covered in a layer of hard scales. There appeared to be claws beneath its belly, and it had a tail that looked exactly like a fishtail. Overwhelmed by extreme fear and reaching the limit of his breath, he did not dare delay for another second and swam with all his strength toward the surface. Despite being an experienced fisherman, the series of horrors he had just endured caused him to choke on several large gulps of water before he could reach the surface to gasp for air. Fearing it would return, Old Zhao swam frantically toward the shore. Only when he crawled onto the dry land did his racing heart temporarily begin to calm down. He scrambled up in a panic, his limbs fumbling, and then ran for his life toward his house. Old Zhao's house was located on a small street along the north bank of the river, not far from that lotus pond. That night, upon returning home, Old Zhao began to run a persistent high fever. In his delirium, he kept mumbling about seeing a dragon, which made his wife extremely worried. His wife remembered how her husband had rushed back with a vacant expression. As soon as he collapsed onto the bed, he couldn't get back up and started burning with fever, which terrified her. By this time, Old Zhao had completely lost consciousness. His face was pale, and his body was as hot as a burning coal. The whole family gathered around the sickbed, everyone feeling anxious. They couldn't understand why a man who had gone to work healthy in the morning had suddenly fallen so ill. Seeing that the fever would not subside and that he remained unconscious, the family hurriedly sought help to take him to the district hospital amidst a torrential downpour. That night, it rained cats and dogs, as if the sky had been punctured by a giant hole, letting water pour down upon the mortal world. That same night, in another village not far away, a man named Liu was unable to go to his neighbor's house to chat as usual due to the heavy rain, so he prepared to go to bed early. While his wife was making the bed, Liu stood looking out the window at the rainy and windy night, mumbling his intention to draw the curtains and go to rest. However, just as he stepped to the window and reached out his hand to pull the curtain, he happened to glance outside. That brief glance left Liu frozen in amazement. According to his later account, at that moment, he saw a dragon-like creature soaring into the sky from the direction of the lotus pond to the west of the village. Just as it lunged into the air, a clap of thunder shook the heavens, accompanied by a blinding lightning bolt that struck directly at the creature. The creature tried its best to evade, twisting and turning amidst the storm, but the lightning and thunder seemed to have eyes, pursuing it relentlessly. Stunned by the extraordinary sight before his eyes, he hurriedly called his wife to come and see. His wife thought her husband was playing a pointless joke, but because of his attitude, she walked to the window despite her annoyance. However, when the couple looked out again, the sky held nothing but a white shroud of rain and flashes of lightning. Absolutely nothing else could be seen. Liu couldn't help but wonder. In just a blink of an eye, the dragon that was struggling to dodge the lightning had completely vanished. His wife grumbled and went to sleep first, leaving him standing dazed by the window. He began to doubt himself, wondering if he had truly seen a dragon or if his eyes had deceived him. The heavy rain lasted continuously for several days before it finally stopped, and the sky gradually brightened again. As soon as the rain ceased, the villagers gathered in large numbers, everyone buzzing with talk about how they had seen a dragon on that stormy night. One man in the village claimed that the dragon seemed to want to fly into the sky at all costs, but every time it lunged upward, it was struck down by lightning. He recounted that he had personally seen it persistently fly up 7 or 8 times, but in the end, it was still knocked back down by the heavenly thunder. Some villagers speculated it was a giant serpent that had cultivated its spirit and was about to transform into a dragon, trying to overcome its tribulation to fly to heaven, but unfortunately meeting with divine punishment. However, the majority did not agree with that opinion. They insisted it was truly a dragon, and they even described in detail the shape of its head and claws. Regarding this falling dragon event, there was another witness who approached it at a very close range, Old Wang from a nearby village. Old Wang recalled those days of relentless rain that had flooded all the fields and gardens. As soon as the rain stopped, he hurriedly carried his hoe to the field to drain the water, hoping to save some of the crops. His path to the field passed by a lotus pond. When he got close to the shore, he suddenly heard low, muffled cries coming from inside, sounding exactly like the lowing of a cow. Being a kind-hearted man, Old Wang thought perhaps someone's cow had wandered off and got stuck in the lotus pond. So he parted the thick lotus plants to go in and check. He followed the cries and drew near, and a terrifying sight met his eyes. In a muddy pit, a strange creature was lying there. Having lived more than half his life, Old Wang had never seen an animal with such a strange shape. Trying to steady his nerves, he held his hoe high and cautiously approached closer, wanting to see clearly what this creature was. Upon getting close, Old Wang could not help but shiver in horror. The creature had horns on its head, a long snake-like body covered in scales, 4 claws underneath that looked like chicken feet, and a mane on its back like that of a horse. Its tail looked like a fish's tail. A foul, pungent stench rose from the creature as it lay gasping in the mud pit. A powerful shock welled up inside Old Wang. He wondered if this was the dragon of legend. Looking at the legendary creature dying before him, its body riddled with bleeding wounds that attracted swarms of flies, Old Wang was extremely conflicted, not knowing what the right thing to do was. It was August, and the sun was as fierce as pouring fire. This dragon was severely injured and exposed to the sun. If a solution wasn't found soon, he feared it would not survive. He hurriedly ran back to the village to call for help. Hearing that a dragon was trapped, everyone excitedly ran to assist, some carrying water, others cutting large branches to provide shade for it. At that time, the dragon was considered a sacred beast bringing good omens, so the villagers were extremely enthusiastic. Even the laziest people in the village were eager to carry water. According to the elders, the villagers used mats and tree branches to build a shelter, then took turns scooping water to pour over the dragon's body so its flesh would not dry up. However, all efforts seemed to yield no results. The dragon remained motionless, and the stench grew heavier by the day. Some people sighed, saying the dragon had violated heavenly laws and was punished by heaven, so there was no way to save it. Despite this, many villagers still knelt and prayed every day, hoping the blue sky would show mercy, and there were even monks who came to perform rituals for the sacred creature. The villagers believed that the consecutive storms were the tribulations caused by this dragon, but seeing it covered in wounds, they still sincerely prayed for its recovery. A strange thing happened. The sky had only been sunny for a short while before it suddenly turned gloomy. Dark clouds rolled in along with the rumbling of thunder, signaling an impending deluge. Seeing the heavy rain about to fall, the villagers who were helping had to stop. They did not understand what the will of heaven was, and they feared those earth-shattering lightning bolts would strike again and involve them. Everyone began to disperse, and the rain arrived immediately, leaving the giant creature lying alone in the muddy puddle in the lotus pond. That year, it rained an unusually large amount, and this particular storm, once it started, lasted for 2 days and nights. This time, although the rain poured down violently, there was absolutely no more thunder or terrifying lightning like before. 2 days later, the rain finally stopped and the sky became clear. Still worried about the dragon, as soon as the rain ceased, the villagers flocked to the lotus pond to see how it was doing. However, when they arrived, the dragon had completely vanished, leaving only a deep indentation in the ground, evidence of where it had once lain. The branches and mats that the villagers had used to provide shade earlier lay scattered to one side. While examining the area, a villager picked up a large piece of material from the mud pit that looked exactly like a dragon scale. That piece of scale was transparent like sparkling crystal. When held up to the sunlight, it even displayed brilliant pentachromatic halos. Unfortunately, later when he moved house, the scale was lost. This event subsequently became a center of attention, covered extensively by domestic and foreign media under the name the Falling Dragon Incident. This news once shocked the whole world, and many people traveled long distances to see the dragon skeleton with their own eyes. However, many years later, biologists concluded that it was merely the skeleton of a stranded whale, and the dragon horns were due to an error during the assembly of the bones. Regardless of how science explains it, in the memories and hearts of the local elders, the falling dragon event of that year remains an obvious and mysterious truth. A strange true story dating back to the 1980 seconds. Under a grey sky, a middle-aged man with a heavy sack on his shoulder hurried along a trail by the river. He kept turning back to urge his young son to hurry for the last ferry. That year, after his parents' marriage fell apart, the boy was taken by his father from the city back to the countryside to be left in his grandmother's care. The 7-year-old boy was drenched in sweat, his face showing clear signs of fatigue and exhaustion. Having walked several miles of forest paths continuously, his little legs seemed unable to take another step. As he walked, the father loudly explained that there were no guest houses in this treacherous wilderness. If they didn't hurry, they would have to sleep outdoors. He himself was struggling under the weight of supplies for the grandmother, so he couldn't offer any more help to his poor son. He tried to comfort his son, saying that once they crossed this river, they would be home and see his grandmother. Though exhausted to the point of collapse, the child gritted his teeth and endured, silently following his father's large figure as it disappeared behind a bend leading down to the pier. Fortunately, as they reached the pier, the last ferry of the day was still anchored, preparing to set sail. The father hurriedly shouted, pleading with the boatman to wait a moment for them. In this poor countryside, the ferry was the only means of crossing the river to reach the village. The boatman hesitated, looking at the cramped cabin, and refused due to overcrowding. He explained it was time to stop, and the ferry could not carry more passengers for safety reasons. At that time, the boat was packed with people and various goods, without a single inch of space left to squeeze in. The boatman maintained a stern expression, telling the father and son to wait until tomorrow morning, despite the clear anxiety on their faces. The father began to plead in a low voice, worried because he had his young child with him and no place to rest in the dark of night. Faced with a sincere plea, the boatman finally relented. He turned to the passengers to discuss rearranging the seating. Fortunately, the simple country folk were all willing to help. Listening to the boatmaster, they began to huddle closer together to make a small space for the father and son. Everyone on the boat enthusiastically cleared their goods, making just enough space. The father was ceaseless in his thanks for their kindness. The father and son huddled at the stern. The boatman reminded them to keep their balance well so as not to slip into the fast-flowing water. The rhythmic sound of oars hitting the water began, and the small ferry slowly drifted downstream, leaving ripples on the surface. As the ferry entered a winding stretch of water, the boatman called out, warning everyone to sit firmly. This section of the river through the mountains was famously treacherous, with swirling rapids that made anyone feel vulnerable against nature. Out on the water, the boy looked up at his father with sad eyes, asking why he was being sent back to the countryside. His parents' divorce had turned his small world upside down. The father explained that because his work was so busy and he often had to work late shifts, there was no way he could take care of him alone. The boy began to sob, recalling the times he had been bullied by children in the village before. But the father could only sigh, as this was the best choice he could make right now. The boy didn't want to leave his school and friends, nor did he want to see his parents living apart. Having said this, he burst into tears. The child's crying annoyed the father, who scolded him and told him to be quiet. Seeing the father's harshness, the passengers on the boat felt dissatisfied and began to speak up in defense of the child. In an uncontrollable fit of rage, the father even threatened to throw the boy into the river for the fish to eat if he didn't stop crying. Those words immediately made the atmosphere on the boat extremely tense, and people began criticizing his boorish attitude. People began to comfort the boy, helping him understand the burden and suffering his father was enduring at that time. Seeing this, the father loudly blamed the boy. It was also because he was so preoccupied with working to provide for the family that his wife had left him for someone else. When the truth came out, the once happy family was completely shattered. Those around him began to criticize him, saying he was taking his anger out on the child, who was innocent. He loudly rebuked everyone, claiming that no one had the right to lecture him on his own family matters. He continued to challenge everyone on the boat, asserting that no one had the right to interfere with how he disciplined his son. Suddenly, the small boat shook violently, as if it had struck a massive underwater rock in the middle of the stream. The boat came to a complete standstill. Despite the boatman's desperate efforts to row, it could not move another inch. Fear began to consume everyone's minds. The tiny wooden boat was heavily overloaded, and even a small incident could lead to disaster for everyone. The boatman stood frozen, his face turning pale as he mumbled anxious words. He said that in all his decades, he had never seen a rock in this part of the river. This could only mean the appearance of the Ha-Yiu river demon, a mysterious underwater monster. At the mention of the monster that flips boats and eats humans, everyone shuddered. If it truly was the creature, this ferry trip might be their final journey. The boatman reasoned that the father's malicious words about throwing his son into the river had disturbed the spirit at the bottom of the water, bringing disaster upon them. Dozens of eyes turned toward the father and son with resentment. Everyone held their breath, staring intently into the murky black water. At that moment, a massive dark shadow slowly glided right under the bottom of the boat, terrifying everyone. The creature was so large that the ferry looked like a piece of rotten wood. Its movement created a powerful whirlpool, causing the boat to spin in place. Everyone on the boat was stunned into silence. No one was calm enough to utter a word before such a terrifying sight. The passengers began to lose patience, urging the boatman to immediately find a way to save everyone's lives. With no other choice, the boatman knelt at the bow, repeatedly bowing his head against the wooden planks, earnestly pleading with the river guard for forgiveness and promising an offering of fat pigs and roasted goats. However, the prayers seemed unable to move the monster lurking below. Suddenly, the water erupted violently, tossing the boat several meters into the air, rocking it as if it were about to capsize. Terrified screams echoed across the river as passengers were thrown into the air before the boat crashed back onto the water's surface. The fall caused water to flood into the cabin. Everyone's lives were now hanging by a thread. The situation was critical. The boatman shouted, demanding everyone bring out whatever items they had for an immediate offering. Another attack would surely sink the boat. Those returning from the market hurriedly pulled out pieces of pork, trays of eggs, and gourds of wine they had just bought to prepare for the offering. Everyone frantically asked the boatman what to do next to escape the monster's wrath. The boatman ordered them to throw all the food and wine into the river. He explained that the monster would not leave until it had received enough offerings. Although these were luxury items they had scraped together every penny to buy, in this situation everyone felt regretful and hesitated slightly. The boatman reminded them that their lives were now more important than any money or material possessions. From a distance, another fierce wave was surging high, heading straight for the small boat like a final threat. In total panic, everyone rushed to dump all the food and drink into the river, hoping for mercy from the dark forces below. Miraculously, as soon as the offerings were thrown down, the massive shadow suddenly dove deep and disappeared just as it touched the side of the boat. Although the water was calmer, fear still gripped everyone's minds. They feared the creature would return for a surprise attack. About 10 minutes passed in terrifying silence before the massive shadow appeared once more behind the boat. But this time, it silently swam away and vanished completely into the deep night of the river. As the boat began to move again, the sound of oars splashing in the water returned amidst everyone's sighs of relief. The father silently bowed his head in apology. He held his little son tightly, gently comforting and reassuring him. The boy suddenly realized that behind the gruff exterior, his father was still the one who loved him most and was always ready to protect him. As the ferry continued its journey, the boy no longer felt afraid of his new life. The silent care from the people on the boat made him feel much warmer than the coldness of the city. This strange story tells of a terrifying experience my great-grandfather had when he accidentally took shelter in a house haunted by hungry ghosts. It happened back in the 30s or 40s, when my great-grandfather was a tenant farmer for a landlord. His life was difficult. He lived at the landlord's estate year-round. Truly, he went to bed later than the dogs and woke up before the rooster crowed to work. The tenant farmers, like my great-grandfather, all slept together on one large bed. Everyone had to wake up very early. Laziness was not permitted, and they toiled all day long. To have the strength for a full day's work, their breakfast usually consisted of cheap, unfilled steamed buns and pickled vegetables. Living conditions were poor back then, so having buns to eat in the morning was already considered a good thing. In those years, there was no agricultural machinery. All the farm work was done entirely by human labor and was incredibly arduous. The work repeated with the seasons, plowing in spring, harrowing in summer, harvesting in autumn, and storing in winter, a natural cycle. That year, the autumn harvest was exceptionally bountiful. The golden grains of rice promised a warm and prosperous winter. On the last day of the harvest, my great-grandfather and the others gathered all the crops from the fields, packed them, and transported them to the granary. A year's work was basically complete. Usually, at the end of the season, the landlord would keep a few workers for odd jobs. My great-grandfather's work continued until the end of the year, without a single day of rest. At the season's end, everyone went to the accounting office to settle their wages. They were even given a little extra rice and flour, a rare treat. Everyone was happy to have a little something extra to take home for the new year. After receiving his pay, my great-grandfather began the long walk home. He ran into bad weather. A fierce snowstorm was blowing, making it impossible to see the road clearly. The snow grew deeper and deeper. My great-grandfather trudged on, one foot sinking deep, the other shallowly. He felt something was wrong. If he got stuck in the snow, he would never get out. Just then, he saw a house at the foot of the mountain. Although it was somewhat dilapidated, it still looked as if someone lived there. He decided to go in and ask for shelter for a while, to wait for the storm to subside before continuing. He walked up to the house and called out twice, hoping for a response. A woman's voice from inside told him to come in. Strangely, her voice was calm, showing no surprise, as if she had been expecting him. My great-grandfather entered and glanced around. There were two people in the house, likely a husband and wife. The man lay on the bed under a heavy quilt, while the woman was wrapped in a blanket, huddled at the head of the bed. My great-grandfather asked and learned that the man was sick. The house was also out of food, and the heavy snow had blocked the door, trapping them inside. The couple was at home, waiting to die. Although the situation seemed a bit strange, my great-grandfather had no other choice. He had to stay, not wanting to face the dangers outside. The woman saw the cloth sack my great-grandfather was carrying. Guessing it contained rice and flour, her eyes lit up and she begged him to give them a little to eat. In those years, no family had enough to eat. It had taken my great-grandfather a whole year to earn that much rice and flour. From the bottom of his heart, he didn't want to give it away. Seeing his reluctance, the woman grew angry. She started shouting, shaking the man on the bed and complaining that this visitor was truly unreasonable. Since entering the house, my great-grandfather hadn't gotten a clear look at the man. When he asked, he was told the man had been starving for 7 or 8 days. My great-grandfather glanced at the bed and was startled. A man was lying there. His face was ashen, his eyes and cheeks were sunken. He didn't look like a living person. It took him a moment to compose himself. The woman's behavior was also abnormal. My great-grandfather wanted to leave but couldn't. My great-grandfather realized something was wrong and had an idea. He took his cloth sack to the kitchen. The woman peeked out, spying on him. My great-grandfather scooped out 2 handfuls of yellow cornmeal and began to knead it. He wanted to make a few buns to help them, not wanting to let them starve to death. In the north, it was common to eat steamed buns made from yellow cornmeal in the winter. The buns my great-grandfather made were the simple, unfilled kind, all dough. He shaped more than a dozen buns, started a fire, and placed them in a steamer. Before long, the fragrant aroma of the buns filled the house. Soon after, my great-grandfather brought the steamed buns to the bed. He called for the master of the house to wake up and eat the buns he had made. The woman called his name a few times. The man, who had looked dead, suddenly shot upright, a terrifying sight. Steamed buns fresh from the pot are incredibly hot, but the 2 of them were completely unafraid, grabbing them directly with their bare hands, showing no sign of feeling the heat. They just stuffed them into their mouths. Both of them ate voraciously, without a hint of civility, like starving wild animals. In no time, the dozen or so steamed buns had been shoved into their mouths. They ate as if they could never be full. My great-grandfather looked at the state they were in. What else could they be but hungry ghosts? The sight horrified him. A hungry ghost is never full. As soon as they saw the steamer was empty, they began to shout in anger. They both turned to look at my great-grandfather. Their eyes and attitude made it clear they wanted to eat him. My great-grandfather backed away 2 steps, grabbed his bag of flour, and ran for the door. He didn't want to become the next meal for these hungry ghosts. The 2 figures lunged from behind, grabbing his clothes. They were determined to catch him to satisfy their hunger. Sharp fangs had also grown in their mouths. They wanted to bite my great-grandfather to death. However, the zombie's teeth were stuck together by the sticky dough of the steamed buns. Although it bit into my great-grandfather's shoulder, it fortunately did not break the skin. Seizing the opportunity, my great-grandfather swung the bag of flour and hit the zombie with it. The powerful blow sent it sprawling to the ground, unable to move. My great-grandfather then kicked the door open and escaped. The 2 zombies shrieked from the doorway but did not follow him outside. In his terror, and with the mountain path being slippery, my great-grandfather lost his footing and fell. He rolled down a snowy slope. Luckily, the snow was quite thick, so he was only knocked unconscious and not seriously injured. It must be said that my great-grandfather had a strong life force. Before he could freeze to death, he was found by a few hunters who saved his life. After waking him, my great-grandfather told the hunters the terrifying story of what he had just been through. However, upon hearing mention of zombies, the hunters couldn't just let it go. They loaded their guns and told my great-grandfather to lead the way back to that house. After breaking into the house, they found no living people at all. The entire house was empty. There were only 2 corpses lying on the bed. Their faces were horrifying, as if they had been dead for a very long time, an extremely ghastly and haunting sight. Judging by their appearance, it was impossible to tell how many days they had been dead. Their mouths were still stuffed full of steamed buns. The hunters carried the bodies outside and burned them, fearing they would cause more trouble. My great-grandfather returned home safely and was reunited with his family. The terrifying journey was over, but those memories would haunt him for the rest of his life. This horror story tells of a strange encounter between 2 worlds. My grandmother's family had 3 sons. The youngest son was 14 years younger than me, and I often played with him when I was a child. We had a very good relationship. When my youngest uncle was 26, he fell in love with a teacher from the next village. The 2 were a perfect match, and before long, they had set a wedding date. At that time, I was on my summer vacation and a bit bored at home. I came up with an idea to ask my mother if I could go and stay at my youngest uncle's house. My youngest uncle loved and cared for me very much. Although he was very busy during that time, whenever he had a spare moment, he would come and play with me for a while. He would also bring out many snacks like melon seeds and chestnuts. He told me to eat them while watching TV. In short, the days at my uncle's house were much more fun than at home. Soon, the wedding day was approaching. The adults became busy with the preparations and no longer had time to look after me, so I was even more free to do as I pleased. On the night before the wedding, the whole family was busy until past 11. My grandmother came inside, looking a bit cross, and scolded me for not being asleep yet. She urged me to go to the bedroom quickly. Because my uncle's house had limited beds, I was sleeping in the same bed with my grandmother during this time. Not long after, my grandmother, having finished her bath, also came in. She lay down beside me, preparing for a good night's sleep after a long, tiring day. However, she had only been in bed for a short while when she suddenly sat bolt upright, as if remembering something incredibly important, looking very rushed. Then, she hurriedly got dressed and went out the door. She didn't say a word, just left quietly, leaving me alone in the dark room. It was the first time I'd seen her act so mysteriously, and I was very curious. After she left, I also got up, wanting to see what was going on. Through the crack of the door, I saw her talking about something with my youngest uncle. They both had smiles on their faces, which made me even more curious. Before long, my grandmother came out with a stack of joss paper. My youngest uncle followed her outside. It seemed they were about to perform some kind of ritual. Afraid of being scolded by my grandmother, I didn't dare to go outside for a better look. I had to quietly crawl back under the covers, but my curiosity was far from satisfied. Not long after, she returned. She had finished her task and was ready for a good sleep after a long, tiring, and busy night. I just heard her let out a long sigh. As she took off her clothes, she muttered something as if talking to someone invisible. At this point, I was no longer sleepy. I turned over and asked her where she had just been and why she was being so mysterious. Seeing that I was still awake, she scolded me. She said sternly, "This is something children don't understand, so don't ask so many questions." Just as she finished speaking, she fell asleep. Soon, the sound of her snoring filled the room. She was in a deep sleep, oblivious to the world. I also felt bored and gradually drifted off to sleep. The night was quiet, and nothing unusual happened. Sometime after midnight, the need to urinate woke me up. I couldn't hold it any longer and had to get up to go to the bathroom. The toilet was in the backyard, but I was closer to the front yard, so, for convenience, I had gotten used to relieving myself in the patch of grass by the front gate. As I crossed the yard, I saw a pile of black ash on the ground. The sight made me feel a little strange and uneasy. I didn't pay it much mind, but when I reached the gate, I noticed something else strange. The gate wasn't closed, but left with a small gap. Although there weren't many thieves in the countryside, my grandmother usually closed the gate before sleeping, but since I had to go so badly, I didn't care much anymore. As I was relieving myself, I felt that the night was particularly cold. It was summer, and while it gets cooler after midnight, this was a bone-chilling cold, like winter. After I finished, I hurried back to my room. As I entered the yard, I closed the gate behind me, which made me feel much more at ease. As I passed through the living room, just for a split second, I thought I saw something, a white shadow flashing by, too fast to see clearly. It was a white blur, and it wasn't in my direct line of sight. It was something that seemed to just flash in the corner of my eye. I looked all around, but there was nothing unusual. The room was empty, without a single soul, filled with an eerie silence. But I didn't give up, because I was certain. In that instant, something had indeed entered my field of vision. There was no mistake. As I walked, I finally saw that white thing again. It had reappeared before me, no longer just a flicker. Moreover, I didn't see it directly, but through a mirror hanging on the wall, an incredibly strange and ghostly sight. Through the mirror, a person was sitting in the old grandmaster chair in the house, but the person was somewhat ethereal, and in the dark environment, they seemed to emit a faint glow. I didn't recognize his face, yet there was a sense of familiarity. Strangely, however, he seemed completely unaware of my presence. I then looked at the actual grandmaster chair across from the mirror, based on its position in the reflection. But the chair itself was empty. There was no one there. At that moment, I understood what was happening. It was an undeniable truth. I had encountered a ghost. However, in that instant, I wasn't very scared. I only had two thoughts. One, this person would not harm me, and two, I should try my best not to disturb them. With these two thoughts in mind, I deliberately took a wide berth. I walked towards the bedroom, treading carefully, not wanting to startle the spirit. But when I got to the bedroom, I had a change of heart. I went to the bedside and shook my grandmother awake, hoping she could help me. Seeing that I was still awake, she got a little angry. She asked, "What time is it? Why aren't you asleep? Don't you know we have a lot to do tomorrow?" I stammered that I had just gone to the bathroom in the yard. I didn't know how to explain, so I could only lie clumsily. Before I could finish, She turned over and went back to sleep. "If you're done, then go back to sleep. What are you waking me up for?" she said. Of course, I couldn't let it go. I said, "Grandma, when I was coming back from the bathroom, I saw a person in the mirror." Then I changed my mind and didn't want to say more, since I had seen it through the mirror, but not in reality. Perhaps it wasn't a person. Maybe it was a ghost. Hearing me say that, my grandmother finally sat up. She couldn't hide her surprise and asked, "What did you say? Did you see a ghost?" I quietly nodded. I recalled the person I had seen, an old man whom I had never met, yet who felt strangely familiar. At that moment, Grandma suddenly became animated and even muttered to herself. She said, "The old man arrived so quickly. This is a happy occasion." I was completely bewildered. I didn't expect her not to be scared. She was even grinning from ear to ear. She asked, "Was that old man in the mirror?" She looked at me, her gaze much gentler. She asked, "Was that old man wearing a dark purple shirt, grey pants, and black shoes?" Since I had just seen him, I immediately recalled the old man's image from my memory. Sure enough, it matched her description perfectly. Grandma smiled, her eyes looking towards the living room. She said, "That person is your maternal grandfather. When he passed away, you were only 3, so you have no impression of him at all." Now, as I recalled the scene from before, it made sense why I wasn't scared at all and even felt a strange sense of closeness. At this point, my grandmother recounted the story of going to find my uncle earlier. She said that before going to bed, she had gone to find him to burn joss paper for his grandfather. It turned out, last night, she suddenly remembered. For such a joyous occasion as a younger son's wedding, they had forgotten to burn joss paper to invite her grandfather to the wedding celebration. That was truly improper. So, the two of them hurriedly burned the paper in the yard. They hoped that their grandfather would receive the invitation and come to celebrate with the family. And leaving a crack in the gate was actually to make it convenient for my grandfather to enter the house, a very thoughtful gesture from my grandmother. However, even she hadn't expected my grandfather to arrive so quickly. It seemed that he had been dearly anticipating his youngest son's wedding. As she spoke, her eyes welled up with tears. The memory of her grandfather had moved her to the point where she could no longer hold back. At this point, I naively told my grandmother to go out and see my grandfather. I didn't know that humans and ghosts were different and could no longer meet. Grandma didn't scold me. She just gave a sad smile and said that in a few more years she would go to visit my grandfather, but for now she wouldn't disturb him. Then she pulled me into an embrace. She said that for now she couldn't bear to leave her naughty grandson, which made me feel very warm. After that night, I didn't think much more about my grandfather. Everything had passed, leaving only beautiful memories in my heart. However, in the years that followed, I often remembered the scene from that night. It was a very special and meaningful memory that could never be erased from my mind. I always wondered why my grandfather only appeared in the mirror, and why he just sat there quietly, seemingly unaware of my presence. As I grew older, I gradually came up with an answer. The world my grandfather inhabited and this world of ours were unrelated. Moreover, his way of life and thought was far different from this world. Perhaps the world he was in only existed within that mirror. And as for why he appeared that night, Perhaps it was because he had received a summons from some force, and my encounter with him was a fateful one, something that cannot be explained. This horror story is completely true. My girlfriend and I ended up renting a haunted house. This happened in 2010. We rented a room and began our life together, a hopeful new start. We were very poor back then and didn't have many belongings. A few cardboard boxes could hold everything we owned. Life was incredibly simple. Although our life was a bit meager, our love for each other was strong. We were content just to have a place to call our own. The house we rented was in an old apartment complex. The building was old, and the decor was from over a decade ago. Nothing special. Even though we didn't have much, cleaning up was exhausting. After a full day of it, we had finally settled in and begun our new life. Looking back, that time was truly sweet. No matter how simple our life was, we could fall asleep in each other's arms. Our love was very pure. And on the very first morning after we moved in, a strange incident occurred, signaling a series of tragedies to come. When my girlfriend woke up, she was holding her lower back, saying it was very painful. I asked her what was wrong, if she had bumped into something. I thought she might have accidentally hit something while moving. I told her to turn around so I could check. Sure enough, there was a bruise on her back. I asked with concern if she had bumped into something the day before. I helped rub the spot and comforted her, saying I'd go to the pharmacy downstairs to buy a bottle of liniment. A little bit of that and it would be fine. She held her back as she got up to make breakfast. However, after a few steps, she seemed to remember something and let out a terrified scream. I immediately asked her what was wrong. I didn't understand why she looked so frightened and couldn't keep her composure. She said she knew where the bruise on her back came from. It was because she was pushed by someone last night while going to the bathroom. The story was truly hard to believe. She recounted that she had gotten up to go to the bathroom during the night. Everything seemed normal, nothing to worry about. The bathroom door was open. As she approached, someone suddenly walked out of the bathroom. To be more precise, it was a human-shaped shadow, my girlfriend described. The shadow quickly brushed past her. Perhaps feeling she was in the way, it reached out and gave her a rough shove. My girlfriend staggered and nearly fell. Luckily, she managed to grab onto a nearby table. When she turned to look, the shadow was gone. My girlfriend said that at the time, she thought she was just groggy and seeing things. She didn't wake me. She never expected that the spot where she was pushed would actually be bruised. Although she told the story with a clear beginning and end, I simply couldn't believe it. Unless there was a ghost in the house, it had to be that she was just half asleep. However, the matter wasn't so simple. A few days later, my girlfriend got home from work earlier than I did. Since the weather was a bit hot, she went to take a shower. While she was showering, she kept getting the feeling that someone was peeping at her. The feeling sent a chill down her spine. Glancing out of the corner of her eye, she saw a human figure standing outside the shower curtain, watching her. At first, she thought I had come home from work. She called out my name a few times, but got no answer. A sense of unease began to grow. Unable to stand it, she boldly pulled back the shower curtain. She wanted to see who it was, and if it was some kind of pervert. However, There was no one there at all. The room was empty, filled with a terrifying silence. She checked every room in the house. The front door and windows were all securely closed. There was no sign that anyone had entered. And yet, the feeling that someone was in the room with her grew stronger and stronger. The feeling made it impossible for her to relax. After I got home from work, she told me what had happened. She said that while showering today, she had seen that dark shadow again. I didn't pay it much mind. Every time she watched a horror movie, she would be on edge for a few days. I just thought she wasn't used to the new environment yet. In the days that followed, she saw the dark shadow more and more frequently. This kept her in a constant state of anxiety, but I never once saw it. We had been living there for about half a month when she started needing medicine to be able to sleep. Her health began to decline at an alarming rate, and I also underwent a huge change. Of course, at the time, I was completely unaware of these things myself. It was all told to me by her later. My eating habits changed drastically. I started eating foods that I had never eaten before or even hated, but now I found them delicious. In terms of personality and attitude, I also underwent a huge change. I became more irritable and difficult, no longer the gentleman I used to be. According to my girlfriend, at that time, I made her feel like she was with a stranger. I was no longer the person she had fallen in love with. This situation only grew worse. It was as if I had suddenly picked up many bad habits, coming home late, alcohol addiction. I even started hitting her. Hitting a woman was something I had always considered a cowardly act. My girlfriend said that she felt completely hopeless at that time. She didn't understand how her life could have turned into this, her heart filled with pain and sorrow. However, I wasn't always like that. Sometimes my sanity would return, though I didn't believe the things she said I had done were actually my doing. We had been together for several years and had almost never argued. To stop our relationship from deteriorating further, we decided to go on a trip to unwind. We chose to go to a place with beautiful scenery, hoping it would help us find peace again. We rented a villa by the sea and stayed there. The strange thing was, it was as if nothing bad had ever happened between us. We became as happy as before. She said that I had finally returned to my old self. Hearing her warm and touching words moved me deeply. We talked about it and reviewed everything that had happened before. It made me start to believe that there was really something wrong with that apartment. If that was truly the case, the landlord was despicable. I decided that after we returned, I would find him and demand an explanation if the house was indeed the cause. A week later, we returned to our city. Still feeling a little scared, we didn't go back to the apartment but carefully found a hotel to stay in and arranged to meet the landlord there. As soon as he arrived, he spoke in a perfunctory tone, saying that if there was a problem, a phone call would have been enough and there was no need for such an expensive meeting. Seeing the landlord's fat, greasy appearance, my blood immediately began to boil. He probably saw that I didn't look pleased. I loudly questioned him, asking if there was something wrong with the house he had rented to me. When he heard my question, his expression immediately changed. I could see he had a guilty conscience and didn't dare to look me in the eye. He wanted to make excuses, but I grabbed him by the collar. He thought I was going to hit him and was so scared that he had to tell the truth. Although I was furious, I had no intention of hitting him. I just wanted to avoid trouble and get him to tell the truth. as I didn't want to be deceived any longer. He hung his head and dejectedly recounted the story. 3 years ago, the apartment had also been rented to a married couple. However, the husband was an alcoholic. Every time he got drunk, he would beat his wife until she was black and blue. As a result, his wife couldn't take it anymore and left him for another man. He began to drink day and night. Many days later, neighbors smelled a foul odor and called the police. When they arrived, he had already been dead for several days from alcohol poisoning. Although the death had nothing to do with the landlord, his nice apartment had turned into a haunted house. He had rented it out several times, but the tenants always moved out. Therefore, he even invited a Taoist priest to perform a cleansing. He thought there would be no more problems, so he rented it to us. Who knew things would still happen? The landlord promised to refund all of our rent money. He also bowed repeatedly in apology, hoping we would forgive him, his attitude very sincere. Looking at him, it was clear it wasn't intentional, and he was in a tough spot himself. Besides, pursuing the matter wouldn't lead to anything, so we had to let it go. This incident happened several years ago. My child is in elementary school now, but every time I think back on it, it still sends a chill down my spine.
Run! Run! Faster!
This story I heard from the elders in the village. It happened in my hometown during the early liberation period. That year, the main work team organized a river dredging campaign. It was a major event, mobilizing manpower from all over to improve the river flow. Everyone was mobilized to participate. Anyone with labor capacity contributed to earn work points. Mr. Lee, a villager, was also enthusiastic about working. During the dredging, as he dug down into a certain area, he suddenly felt something unusual. One of Mr. Lee's shovels suddenly struck something rigid beneath the riverbed. He exclaimed in surprise, thinking he had hit a large rock. Mr. Lee intended to dig the rock out, thinking it was so large it would require explosives to break. However, what he didn't expect was that the more he dug, the larger part of the rock was revealed, growing strangely larger. Noticing the oddity, a few other villagers working nearby also became curious and ran over to help Mr. Lee dig. They wanted to see what this giant object was that lay so deep beneath the riverbed. But after only a moment, they quickly realized something was amiss. The object didn't feel like rock at all. When struck with a shovel, it had an elastic quality. One person hesitantly said he felt it wasn't rock, which made the others wonder what it was. As they whispered and discussed the strange object, unexpectedly, the large rock suddenly stirred. A loud sound erupted, accompanied by a tremor, terrifying everyone to the extreme. They were all completely taken by surprise. Everyone fell backward onto the ground. One person realized it wasn't a rock but a living thing and frantically shouted for everyone to run. All those present were utterly terrified. Without a word, they all hastily abandoned their tools, scrambling and running chaotically up the riverbank, trying to escape whatever was stirring beneath the riverbed. From the riverbank, everyone watched in horror as the large rock began to emerge from the mud. It moved powerfully, and slowly, a giant turtle head and 4 limbs appeared, fully detaching itself from the riverbed. Everyone vaguely realized it was a giant turtle, nearly the size of a farmer's 3-wheeled cart. The creature was covered in mud, but its sheer size astonished everyone. Suddenly, in the crowd, a man loudly urged them to capture it alive and turn it over to the state. In those days, patriotic fervor was high, and everyone agreed, determined to capture the giant turtle. A few bolder individuals quickly ran to get ropes, then unhesitatingly rushed down into the river towards the turtle. Meanwhile, the more timid ones stood on the bank, constantly cheering and shouting encouragement, creating a fervent atmosphere. The bravest men managed to approach the giant turtle. They quickly wrapped ropes tightly around its body, especially around its neck and shell, hoping to tie down this enormous creature. 4 men exerted all their strength, each pulling a rope tied to the giant turtle. They put all their effort into it, trying to lift it out of the riverbed, but the creature was too heavy and seemed not to budge. The giant turtle possessed extraordinary strength. The men, despite their utmost efforts, could not hold it down. The ropes were taut, and one man was even dragged across the ground. The giant turtle not only wasn't pulled up but began to move, dragging all 4 men who were trying to hold it forward. Its astonishing strength made these men completely unable to control it. One person suddenly had an idea to flip the turtle over, because if it was flipped onto its back, it wouldn't be able to move. Immediately, he called out to everyone to come and help. Following his lead, the other men also joined in, gripping the ropes tightly. They shouted in unison, putting all their strength into pulling the turtle. While one group pulled the ropes, the others ran to the other side, pushing together against the turtle's shell. Everyone was determined to flip this giant creature onto its back. After much effort and coordinated teamwork, they finally succeeded in flipping the giant turtle onto its back. It lay upside down, its 4 limbs flailing in the air, seemingly subdued. The giant turtle retracted its head and limbs into its shell, no longer struggling. Everyone quickly used ropes to tie it securely, then drove large stakes into the ground to completely immobilize it, ensuring it couldn't escape. Since they had to wait until the next morning for the district's truck to come and transport the turtle, 2 men were assigned to guard it that night. They set up a small tent and slept right next to the turtle, ensuring it couldn't escape. During the night watch, one of them suddenly had a strange dream. In the dream, he saw an old woman with silver hair slowly entering the tent, her face filled with anxiety and sadness. The old woman in the dream pleaded for them to please release it. Although he was very surprised and asked what she meant, she did not directly answer, but continued to beg them to release her elder brother. The villager did not recognize who this old woman was, nor could he understand which elder brother she was referring to. The old woman's face was full of sorrow, as if bearing a deep sadness, and she continued to mumble her pleas to him. The villager asked the old woman one more time about the elder brother she was mentioning. However, seeing that he persistently refused, the old woman changed her demeanor, snarling a threat. "If you do not release it, you will regret it." After speaking, the old woman turned and walked away. She walked away angrily, huffing, leaving the villager alone in the tent with confused and fearful thoughts about the strange dream. The next morning, he woke up, still preoccupied with the strange dream from the night before. It left him feeling very confused and a little anxious, wondering if it was an omen. He told his friend who was guarding with him that night about the strange dream. His friend was also startled upon hearing it. It turned out that he too had dreamed of a silver-haired old woman last night who told him to release her elder brother. Both were astonished to learn they had the same strange dream. The 2 of them stepped out of the tent and saw that the district's truck had arrived. The sound of the truck's engine broke the morning silence. It was time to take the giant turtle away. As everyone was pulling the giant turtle ashore, the villagers suddenly heard the sound of rushing water from afar. A loud sound, as if a flood was pouring down, immediately caught their attention. He turned his head and was utterly horrified to see a large torrent of water cascading down from afar. He frantically shouted a warning to everyone about the flood, urging them all to quickly run up to the bank. Those working in the riverbed were in extreme panic. Without needing to be told, they exerted all their strength, scrambling and running chaotically up the riverbank, trying to escape the torrent of floodwaters surging towards them. Just as the last people set foot on the bank, the surging floodwaters crashed down. It swept away the giant turtle, submerging it in a white cascade. The turtle vanished, leaving no trace. What was strange was that as soon as the giant turtle was swept away, people saw that there wasn't just one. There were two such large turtles swimming in the current, the other one of equivalent size, astonishing everyone. One person was amazed by the sight before his eyes. The others didn't know, but the two men did. That second turtle of similar size was indeed the old woman they had dreamed of the night before. The two giant turtles swam away, gradually disappearing amidst the surging waters. At that moment, everyone was stunned and suddenly realized the true reason why the flood had unexpectedly surged. A truth gradually revealed itself. During the river dredging process, the upstream water should have been blocked by the dam. However, a large amount of water suddenly poured down. This puzzled everyone, wondering where the water could have come from to flood in such a way. Afterward, an old man who frequently went to the river to throw stones recounted a strange story. He said that day while throwing stones, he unexpectedly saw a giant turtle swimming straight towards him from afar. The old man recounted that on that day the creature was so large that he likened it to a four-wheeled vehicle moving on the water's surface. The giant turtle continued to swim straight towards the dam. As it got closer, it unexpectedly dived deep beneath the surface, disappearing from the old man's sight, leaving a mystery behind. Immediately after diving, the giant turtle used its head to ram down the dam. A shattering sound echoed, and the long-blocked water now rushed down, creating a sudden flash flood. Later, a great flood occurred, and people once again saw those two giant turtles swimming in the current. Some rumored they were husband and wife, others said they were siblings. From then on, for several decades, no one saw them again. This story is about a lazy person who spent all day loafing around the city. He had no job, no income, and could only get by with petty thefts. However, his life had recently changed. He not only dressed more smartly but also managed to buy a new phone, which was very suspicious. Despite being a criminal, he had a very kind and honest-looking face, which made others not guard against or suspect him. There's an old saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover." He took advantage of his appearance to make money in a very dishonest way. He would often go to secluded suburbs and pretend to be a hitchhiker. Then he would stand by the roadside, waiting for gullible victims to pass by. On the way, he would choose a secluded place with few people to rob. His weapon was usually a dagger, which he used to threaten his victims. Although there were few cars in the suburbs, thanks to his kind face, some good-hearted people were still willing to give him a ride, without any suspicion. In this way, in just 2 short months, He had succeeded in several robberies. The frequency of the robberies he committed increased. At first, he was a little scared, worried that the victims would report him to the police. However, after several successful attempts, that fear gradually disappeared and he became more confident. After a few times, he realized there was no problem. This was mainly because the amount of money he stole each time was not large, and he also chose hidden corners, leaving no clues. After a few successful times, his audacity grew. That day, he went to a pre-selected spot and stood by the roadside, waiting for his next victim. Before long, a car drove up. The headlights illuminated the area, signaling that a new victim had appeared, an opportunity to make money. Seeing the car get closer, he waved his hand to signal. He believed that the driver would stop and give him a ride. The driver seemed to have quickly spotted him. The car's speed slowed down and it gradually approached, preparing to stop next to him. He was overjoyed. He never expected his first business of the day to come so quickly. It was a stroke of luck. The driver was a young man who looked to be around his age. He warmly asked if he wanted a ride, without any suspicion. After he got in the car, the young man only asked him vaguely about his destination. After that, he started the car and drove off, beginning a journey. On the way, the robber glanced at the young man. He wanted to assess his victim so he could come up with a perfect plan for the robbery. The young man looked very scholarly and thin. He was also wearing a suit and a shirt. He looked like an office worker. It seemed like an easy victim to subdue. After a careful observation, the robber felt even more at ease. He was very confident in dealing with a young, inexperienced person like this and was no longer worried. Everything was going according to the robber's plan. The car quickly arrived at the location he had requested, a secluded and deserted place. The young man deliberately slowed down and pulled over. He said they had arrived and asked if it was okay for him to get out here. He was very polite. At this moment, the robber let out a strange smile. He secretly mocked the young man, thinking he was a fool who had no idea that danger was approaching. After that, he pointed outside the car. It was pitch black outside. He said that there was no light here. How could he live here? The robber didn't want to waste time. He pulled out his dagger, put it to the young man's neck, and demanded that he hand over all his money. The young man looked very scared. He couldn't believe that someone who looked so honest was a robber. Seeing his victim's fear, the robber laughed. He said that if he didn't believe his face, did he believe this knife? Then he threatened to stab him a few times. At this moment, the young man was truly scared. He trembled as he took out his wallet and gave it to him, hoping to save his life. The robber took the wallet, his face showing self-satisfaction. He smugly said that as long as he was obedient, nothing bad would happen to him. However, when he opened the wallet, he was stunned and felt very disappointed. He couldn't accept it. The wallet was completely empty. It was just a hollow leather wallet. There was not a single penny inside. The self-satisfied look on the robber's face immediately turned to anger. He snarled and asked if he was playing a trick on him, an unforgivable insult. The young man whimpered. He said that he truly had no money and the car belonged to his wife. If he had money, he wouldn't have to work. However, the robber was not a fool. He didn't believe the young man's words and once again raised his knife, threatening to use it. Immediately, he shifted his gaze to other parts of the car with the intention of finding something valuable. After that, he grabbed the young man's collar. He demanded that he quickly give him his belongings, and his tone had become very impatient. However, at this moment, the young man's expression changed. The initial tension was slowly disappearing, replaced by a strange calmness. The robber was secretly astonished. He warned him not to play any tricks or he would strike. In this desolate place, no one could save him. Unexpectedly, the young man burst out laughing. He said that he was a ruthless killer, a demon. The robber immediately felt guilty. This young man was not acting normally, and his aura had also become more powerful. Although he was holding a knife, he felt that he was not in control of the situation. A sense of unease crept into his heart, which was very frightening. He couldn't understand why the person in front of him had become a different person. He grabbed his collar and asked what he was laughing at and if he was not afraid of death. The young man did not answer his question directly. He looked behind the robber and asked a meaningful question. Wasn't this car familiar? The robber's heart clenched. A sense of unease rose, which made him shiver, feeling that something was wrong. That night, when he got in the car, he had indeed felt a sense of familiarity. He just thought it was the same type of car and didn't think too much of it. Now, when he was reminded of it, he began to look around. He wanted to find out what was going on, his heart filled with confusion. After a quick look, his heart began to panic. This car was very similar to the car he had robbed not long ago, but how could it be here? At this moment, he noticed an object placed on the dashboard. That decoration terrified him when he realized what it was. That object was also on the car he had robbed. Furthermore, there were a few red marks on it, which looked very much like bloodstains. The young man smirked, seeming to be very entertained by the robber's fear. He asked if he remembered now, 2 months ago, on this very road. His face turned pale. The young man's words were not wrong at all. He asked in a panic how he could know these things. 2 months ago, he had murdered a woman. He thought that crime had been buried, but he never expected it to be brought up again today. The reason was very simple. He had only intended to rob her, but when he saw how beautiful she was, he couldn't control himself and assaulted her. After that, knowing that he had committed a great crime, he killed the girl and buried her body in the fields, hoping that his crime would never be discovered. Because he was very afraid of being discovered, he had been quiet for 2 months. Only recently, when he saw no signs of trouble, did he go out to work again. That incident was not exposed. So how did this young man know about it? At this point, he didn't care anymore. He had to kill this person too to cover his tracks. At this moment, the young man closed his eyes and tears streamed down his face. He said that he had killed the person he loved the most and that he had long since not wanted to live anymore. The robber was no longer patient enough to talk. He yelled fiercely that he had already killed someone and was not afraid to kill another. After saying that, he plunged the knife into the young man's body. He did not want to leave any witnesses and was determined to silence him forever. He thought the young man would scream in pain. To his surprise, his expression did not change at all, as if the knife had not even pierced him. He knew that after a stab like that, no matter how strong a person was, they could not remain so calm. In fact, he didn't even flinch. His knife had indeed gone in. However, not a single drop of blood came out, A very bizarre and frightening ghostly sight. The location of the wound looked very strange. Looking closely, the shirt had turned into a layer of paper, and inside was empty. There was nothing there. The robber felt that something was wrong. He quickly looked up at the person in front of him, and a horrifying sight appeared before his eyes. Without him knowing, the young man's head had turned into a paper doll's head. That lifeless face made him shiver. The story was not over yet. The entire car had also turned into a paper car, the kind that is usually burned for the dead at funerals. It was very scary. The robber was completely stunned. In his mind, there was only one thought. He had to run away and could not stay here. He kicked the paper door open and crawled out of the car. He didn't want to be stuck in this ghostly car for another second. After getting out, he quickly ran to the other side of the road. He wanted to get away from this scary place as fast as possible, not daring to look back. At this moment, he vaguely felt that something was following him. He fearfully turned his head to look back, and a horrifying sight appeared. The scary thing was, the young man he had just stabbed. He was not far behind him, and he could even see his face clearly. Immediately after, an even more terrifying scene occurred. The young man's face suddenly transformed into the face of the woman he had killed 2 months ago. A moment later, it turned back into the young man's face. Both faces were swollen and rotten. They were clearly not from a living person, which was very scary. After that, the robber felt his feet slip. It turned out that he hadn't noticed that he had run to the edge of a cliff. He only had time to let out one final tragic scream before he fell down the cliff. His fate had been sealed and could no longer be changed. It was a long time later that people discovered his body. He had died a tragic death, paying the price for the crimes he had committed. There was nothing around. No one knew how he had gotten here, and no one knew how he had fallen down the cliff. It was very mysterious. Later, after the police conducted a thorough investigation, they were able to connect the robber to a previous robbery and murder case. The whole incident was finally brought to light. The young man and the woman he killed were a newly married couple. Their love was torn apart by an unmerciful robber. After his fiancée was killed, the young man kept watch on that road day and night. He hoped to find the culprit to avenge the one he loved. However, because he was too exhausted and heartbroken, the young man passed away. After that, someone found his body by the side of the road. The young man, after he died, continued to search for the culprit. He continued to keep watch on that road until the robber appeared again, and he took his revenge on him. Let me introduce myself. I am a delivery person. Every day, my work begins with a constant ringing of new orders on my phone. Like all my colleagues, my job is to be on standby in front of restaurants, waiting and competing for every order, hoping to earn more income. Every day, in order to make a living, I have to risk my life with speed, constantly weaving through crowded traffic to deliver goods on time. Regarding my job, everyone probably knows the routine. Everything happens in a hurry. There's not a single moment to rest. After accepting an order, I have to get to the restaurant as fast as possible to pick up the food. Every second is precious. There's no time to waste. After that, I have to continue racing against time. I have to deliver the food to the customer as quickly as possible, regardless of the dangers on the road. To avoid being late, my only option is to weave through the smallest gaps in traffic, an extremely risky and dangerous action. According to statistics, on average, 2.5 delivery people are involved in traffic accidents every day. It's safe to say this is one of the most dangerous professions. We also have to deal with all kinds of customers. If we are even a few minutes late, we might get a complaint or be severely scolded. My monthly income is unstable, depending on my health and the weather. I have to work until late every night before I can return home. When I get off work and come home, my body is exhausted. I barely have the strength to drag myself up the stairs of the rental building. I live in a single rental room that costs only 900 yuan a month. 3 people rent the apartment, but we almost never see or talk to each other. The irony is that every day I deliver dozens of delicious meals to other people, but I am always the one who eats late, alone in my empty room. That's life. No matter how tired I am after dinner, I still have to smoke a cigarette. Because there is a smoke detector in the room, I can only go to the balcony. To be honest, I really enjoy smoking on the balcony. It helps me relieve stress after a long day, and it's also when I feel lucky to have returned home safely. Maybe someone will ask, why do you work such a hard and dangerous job? The answer is simple. This job has no high requirements. As long as you have the strength, you can earn money. Every time I look at the city at night, I also have dreams and plans for the future. I hope that one day my life will get better. I've talked a bit too much, but that was to set the stage for the story to come. Everything started one day after I got off work and came home. That day, I washed my uniform. I figured that no matter what, it would be dry by tomorrow morning. There was nothing to worry about. However, it didn't dry. The humid weather left my uniform still damp, so I couldn't wear it to work, which was very annoying. Not wearing a uniform would result in a fine. Just when I didn't know what to do, I saw another company uniform hanging on the balcony. I didn't know who it belonged to. My 2 flatmates didn't work this job. I guessed that it belonged to a colleague who used to rent here and left it behind. I didn't think much of it and just put it on. The shirt was a little faded and stiff, but the size fit me quite well, so there was no big problem. That day, as I went down the stairs, I had a strange feeling. It felt like someone was following me right behind me, which was very scary. I unconsciously turned my head to look, but I didn't see anyone. At that time, I didn't think too much of it, just figuring I hadn't gotten enough rest. As usual, I went to the gathering point to wait for orders. A colleague saw me and asked why I was wearing such an old uniform. He was very curious. I just laughed it off, saying that my uniform hadn't dried, so I had to borrow someone else's. He just teased me for a bit and didn't ask any more questions. After a few sentences, a new order came in. I quickly got on my motorcycle and started a new day of work, completely unaware that disaster was about to strike. When I went to pick up the food, you should know that fast food restaurants usually have glass doors, and during business hours, those doors are always open. When you walk past the glass door, there will be a reflection. That's a very normal thing. There's nothing to worry about or pay attention to. However, when I walked past the glass door, I was startled to discover that in the reflection, someone was walking right behind me, a very frightening figure. Furthermore, that person's head and face were covered in blood. That horrifying sight sent chills down my spine, terrifying me to the extreme. I couldn't believe it. I screamed in fear and stepped back. However, there was no one behind me. and in the reflection, it was only me looking terrified. My scream was a bit loud, causing the customers in the restaurant to turn and look. Their strange looks made me feel a little embarrassed and awkward. The owner of the restaurant also asked me what was wrong. I didn't explain much. I quickly grabbed the food and left, just wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. When I got out the door, I unconsciously glanced at the glass door again. I wanted to confirm that there was no one behind me, that it was just a hallucination. That day, I was a bit rattled, or to be more accurate, I was a bit unlucky. Unfortunate things kept happening to me, and I couldn't avoid them. I was riding my motorcycle when a car in front of me suddenly braked hard. The unexpected situation left me no time to react. I could only try my best to avoid it. I was following a bit too closely. Fortunately, my brakes were still good, so there was no collision. A close call. A real stroke of luck. Because of my sudden stop, a car behind me almost hit me. The driver stuck his head out and cursed at me horribly. The driver drove for a while but still turned back to curse at me. This wasn't the first time this happened. Because of my job, I was already used to it. I didn't have much time, so I continued with my work. I drove for 2 more intersections. That day, the road seemed more crowded than usual. Because the system kept reminding me that I was about to be late, I decided to run a yellow light. A risky decision. Unexpectedly, on another road, there was also a small truck. That driver also intended to run the yellow light, a deadly coincidence. The result was that just as I was driving to the middle of the intersection, the truck came straight at me. Its speed was very fast, with no signs of slowing down. At that moment, I no longer had time to react. I could only stare blankly as the truck sped towards me, unable to avoid it. Death was very close. With a bang, I was hit and fell to the ground. The powerful impact dazed me, and I couldn't move. I could only lie there and endure it. The truck's speed was very fast. It ran over my motorcycle, dragging it along the road, creating a deafening and very frightening sound. And I was dragged under the truck. I was dragged along the road for a bit, my body in pain, unable to move. I could only wait for death. I stared blankly as the wheel came straight for my head. I wanted to dodge, but I couldn't move. I could only close my eyes and wait for death. I thought I would be crushed. As I was closing my eyes to await death, my body was suddenly pulled away by a strong force, an unexpected intervention. I felt as if someone had quickly pulled me out from under the truck. That person had saved me from an imminent death. Due to my condition at that time and the dim light, I couldn't see the person's face clearly, but thinking back on it now, it seemed to be the person who had been following me. After pulling me out from under the truck, that person vanished without a trace. He had saved me and then left without a word. A silent hero. After the collision, I felt a bit dizzy. I heard passers-by talking and slowly approaching me. My heart filled with panic. I wanted to see if the person who saved me was in the crowd. I wanted to know who he was and why he had come to my aid in my time of need. However, the answer was no. In the crowd, there was no sign of that person. It seemed he had truly disappeared without a trace. A few kind people helped me up. I tried to move my arms and legs. Nothing was missing, and I could still move. It was a miracle that I had survived. To be safe, I still went to the hospital for a checkup. Besides a few scratches, there was nothing to worry about in my body. It was a real miracle. When I got home, I suddenly realized something. Could the events that happened today be related to the shirt I was wearing? A suspicion arose. The more I thought about it, the more I felt there was a problem. Perhaps the owner of this shirt had died under a wheel, and when I wore it and was in danger, he had come back to save me. To know the truth, I had to ask my flatmates. I waited for a long time at the door, and finally, the person from the next room came out. He was probably going to the restroom. Normally, we didn't talk much. However, this time, I took the initiative to call him over, wanting to ask him a few things. I asked him about the uniform that was always hanging on the balcony. I wanted to know who it belonged to and why it had been left there for so long. My flatmate said that the uniform did indeed belong to a former colleague of mine who used to live here. His words confirmed my suspicion. I was curious and asked why that person didn't take the uniform with him when he moved out. A very simple question, but the answer made me shiver. My flatmate said that the colleague had died, a truth that sent shivers down my spine. How could a dead person take their belongings with them? He said it with a very calm expression, as if it had nothing to do with him. I quickly asked him about the cause of that person's death. I heard he had died suddenly by the side of the road while making a delivery. However, I didn't believe it, because accidents like this are not uncommon in our profession. As for why he saved me, maybe it was because he didn't want me to die young like he did. Or maybe it was just my hallucination. At present, I still have to continue competing for orders, racing against time. It's not that I don't want to live a good life, but that I have to live first. I still go to the balcony to smoke every night. The only difference is that I will light another cigarette and place it next to me, as if to pay my respects to that unfortunate colleague. I have also washed the uniform and hung it back on the balcony. My story ends here. It's not easy for us to live. The second story happened in the second year after I graduated from university and started working. At that time, my girlfriend and I rented a house together. It was a very old Western-style house. The house had an ancient, gloomy appearance, with moss-covered walls and long, dark corridors, always giving a cold feeling even when it was sunny outside. The neighbors had strange faces, were taciturn, and seemed to always hide some secret about the house we were about to move into. We only rented one room because the price was cheap. We couldn't demand better conditions. The room was small, the furniture old, but for us at that time, having a place to stay was lucky. It's an old house, so don't pay attention to any noises at night. The landlord said a meaningful sentence after showing us the house. At first, I didn't understand what he meant, only thinking it was a normal instruction.
It's a dangerous game you're playing.
I heard a familiar
sure
lullaby melody, which kept me from falling asleep. I turned to ask my girlfriend if she heard anything. Upstairs, there was a whimpering sound, like a little girl singing. The sound was sometimes near, sometimes far, sometimes clear, sometimes faint, as if playing with my nerves. The voice was clear but carried a lingering sadness, a chilling lament, unlike any song I had ever heard. I tried to calm myself down and woke my girlfriend to listen, but she completely refused to pay attention to me. No, listen, you really can hear a child singing. It's a little girl. I nudged her. She thought I was mistaken, or that perhaps it was someone upstairs listening to music. But I knew for sure what I was hearing was real. But no matter how I listened, it didn't sound like music because there was no accompaniment and the singing was intermittent, making me feel extremely uncomfortable. On the second day, when we left the house, we saw an auntie neighbor sitting and picking vegetables in the corridor. She sat there, silent and focused on her task, but I had a feeling she was waiting for us. "Auntie, is anyone living upstairs?" I decided to ask the auntie if anyone lived upstairs, and why there was such strange singing in the middle of the night. The auntie replied, without looking up, that no one lived upstairs. It had been abandoned for several years. Her answer left me speechless. If no one was there, then where did that singing come from? She suddenly looked up, stared directly into my eyes, and asked if I had heard a little girl singing. I had a feeling she already knew everything. The auntie's words sent chills down my spine. How did she know this? Had something similar happened to previous tenants before? So the auntie began to tell me the story of that house, a horrifying tale that had been buried by the years, explaining the strange phenomena. She recounted that a very long time ago, this place used to be home to a noble family, and it was also where the tragedy began. At that time, the man worked at a trading association, and the family of 3 had a small daughter. The girl was very pretty and adorable, the pride of the entire family. When she was young, the auntie had applied to work as a nanny for this family. Her kind and gentle nature made her well liked by the family. One day, the family's young daughter suddenly went missing. The man reported it to the authorities. They searched everywhere, but could not find any trace of the girl. They searched inside and outside the house, but still couldn't find her. The girl's mysterious disappearance caused a great shock. No one knew where she had gone or what had happened to her. Afterward, they began to suspect the auntie was the one who harmed the girl. All suspicion fell on the poor woman, even though there was no evidence linking her to the child's disappearance. So they took the auntie away. After there was no incriminating evidence, she was set free. The homeowner then moved abroad and left this house to the auntie to live in. To earn extra income, the auntie rented out the other rooms in the house. But strange things happened. People in that room frequently heard a little girl singing the Kagome lullaby. The mournful singing still echoed every night. Everyone said that the little girl's soul had not yet left the room. However, the girl never harmed anyone. She was just a lonely soul. So I tried to stay for another month and then moved out. I couldn't bear the feeling of living with a ghost, no matter how harmless it might be. It wasn't until 4 or 5 years later that I got married and had my own house. One day, while watching television, I happened to catch a news report. The news report said that the house I used to rent that year had been demolished. During the demolition process, a secret that had been hidden for decades was uncovered. While removing the ceiling, workers discovered a skeleton that fell down. The skeleton had been there for a very long time, meticulously hidden. It was the skeleton of a girl about 7 or 8 years old, still wearing a kimono. This discovery shocked public opinion, shedding light on the mystery of the girl's disappearance years ago. That room was the very room I had rented years ago, and the girl was also confirmed to be the one who went missing that year. The truth was then revealed. The nanny had accidentally suffocated the little girl, but out of fear, she had hidden the girl's body in the attic area where no one would ever bother to look.